Hello, everybody. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Smart Policing Initiative at CNA. I'm actually conducting my portion of this webinar from a lobby of a hotel in San Francisco. So if you hear some light jazz music in the background, try and ignore it. And as soon as I'm done, I'll probably go on mute for a while. But I welcome everybody today, and I thank you for your interest in today's webinar on smart policing and data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety, D-DACTS as we affectionately know it. I believe this is the largest group of webinar participants that we've ever had, so we're very pleased with the turnout and the interest today. And I want to take a moment just to say thanks to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, especially Kate McNamee and Ken Camarada, for their ongoing support of the Smart Policing Initiative and for our webinar series, as well as a number of other training and technical assistance services that are offered through CNA. I want to thank our presenters today, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. I want to thank Peggy Schaefer from the National Association of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. Peggy, thank you very much for your help in pulling this together and organizing this webinar. Vivian and Zoe, thank you very much from CNA for providing all the background technical assistance to get this thing up and running. Before I get to the goals and outline for today's webinar, please give me a few more minutes to cover a few details. I think most of you know, if you don't know, you should know that this webinar is recorded, as are all of our webinars. So if you chime in and talk, please be mindful of that. And all of the webinars that we have done are available on the Smart Policing website. They cover many topics, such as the use of technology in law enforcement, focused deterrence, place-based policing, performance measurement, sustaining innovation in police organizations. We recently did one on how to be a smart police officer. We have several that address outreach and collaboration issues, and we have several new webinars coming up. One that will be facilitated by Ed Davis, former commissioner in Boston, on how to be a smart police executive. We're going to have a Criminology 101 webinar that does a review of crime theory. We're pulling together a webinar on how law enforcement deals with victims, and a webinar on sustainability. So there's lots coming up in smart policing and on this webinar series. We hope you'll take some interest. We have many participants today, so I always encourage people, if they have a question or they need clarification on something that's said, please don't hesitate to chime in or say something. But if it's moving at a quick pace and there's too much going on, there's a chat room availability. And so any comments that you want to make or questions that you have, please feel free to use that facility as well. This webinar is scheduled for about 1 hour. It's pretty jam-packed, so please forgive us if we go over time a little bit. And at the end of the webinar, each person who's registered will receive an opportunity to evaluate how the webinar went. And since we have many new participants today, I encourage you strongly to please pay attention to that. We do look at those evaluations, and we use them to decide how we're going to put the next ones together and how things are going. So thank you very much for your attention. Let's go to that first slide. So today, very simple set of goals for today's webinar. Obviously, we want to explain D-DACTS and why we're presenting D-DACTS in the context of smart policing. We think there's some great synergy there. We want to encourage our smart policing sites, and actually any other sites that are not familiar with D-DACTS, to investigate it as an emerging evidence-based strategy. Quite frankly, we need more research done on D-DACTS so we can improve the evidence base that we have so far, and you'll hear about that during the webinar today. And in support of that, we're going to present some recent research findings regarding D-DACTS. That will come in a little bit. Very good. So, okay, so now I'm on slide 3. So for the outline for today, we're going to hear from Chief Howard Hall in Roanoke County, Virginia, on a D-DACTS overview. I'll step back in and just talk for a few minutes about the relationship between smart policing and D-DACTS. Then we'll We'll hear from these 3 presenters about case studies of D-DACTS in action, so to speak. Then we'll wrap up for a few minutes after that. So that's the outline for today. I'm going to now turn it over to Chief Hall for the D-DACTS overview. Chief?
Thanks, Chip. I'm just going to take the next few minutes to provide a little background information and talk about what D-DACTS really is, which then you'll have a chance to see in action as our other presenters take over. So go to the next slide. There we go. First, the definition, and this is right out of the D-DACTS operational guidelines. D-DACTS is an operational model that uses the analysis of location-based crash, crime, calls for service, and enforcement data to establish effective and efficient methods for deploying resources. I think there are 2 really important points in that definition. The first one is that D-DACTS is an operational model. This is not a project or a program that has a specific start date and an end date. This is really a way of doing business, a way of deploying our operational resources. And then the second really important point is that D-DACTS is based around location-based data related to crashes, crimes, or anything else that's impacting a community. As most people on the line probably know, for most of our history, we've kind of siloed things, particularly crashes and crimes. And what we learned through this initiative is that in many cases there's overlap in relationships that we can use to deploy our resources more effectively. Go to the next slide. Now, D-DACTS has 7 guiding principles, and these form the backbone of the model. The first is partner and stakeholder participation. I think it's really important to recognize that D-DACTS in no way suggests that we abandon our efforts in crime prevention or community policing or problem solving. In fact, D-DACTS should provide an opportunity to enhance and strengthen our relationships with partners and stakeholders. When we say partners and stakeholders, there's probably an important distinction there. Stakeholders being the people in our community that we serve, that are affected by what we do, versus a partner, who is someone or an organization that's going to actively participate. So when we talk about partners, we like to make sure we include our employees, particularly our police officers, but that could be a variety of other government or non-government agencies or organizations within a community. In my experience, the state highway safety officers are great partners. Certainly other law enforcement agencies are great partners, parole and probation offices, fire and rescue services, school systems. I mean, really, you could make a huge list. The important part is, having them at the table. The second guiding principle is data collection. Most of our departments collect volumes of data that we hopefully use then to create analysis. Important points here include making sure that we're collecting data in a timely and accurate manner, because when we move over to analysis, the old garbage in, garbage out theory applies. If the data is not timely and accurate, then our analysts are not going to be able to give us actionable information and products. The third guiding principle is data analysis. The analysis is what drives our operations. So where are our problems, when are our problems occurring, who's involved, all the things that we need to help us narrow down particularly our places, but the other information to target problems appropriately. So the data drives the fourth guiding principle, which is strategic operations. We design our use of operational resources around what we see in analysis products. And here's where we find that you can attack particularly crash and crime problems together and have a measurable impact on public safety in our communities. Many of the same tactics we might use to deter crime will also help us with driving behavior and vice versa. Our fifth principle, information sharing and outreach. It's important that we involve our partners and stakeholders and we share with them the information that we have, particularly with our employees in our departments, so that they understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we're asking them to do certain things, but also our stakeholders in our community, so they too understand why we're doing certain things. Our sixth guiding principle, monitor, evaluate, and adjust. I often say to groups that putting a plan together around data and analysis is hard work, but the work's just begun when you implement that plan because you've got to pay attention to it. You've got to monitor to make sure that things are going as you planned and that the activities you planned are being carried out. But you've also got to evaluate to make sure that you're getting the results that are desired. And if you're not, it's certainly desirable to make adjustments along the way. And I think that's something that's to be expected. The seventh guiding principle, and really the bottom line here, this is about outcomes. And those outcomes depend on the agency and the community. Whether it's a robbery problem, a burglary problem, personal injury crashes, DUI crashes, whatever is creating a public safety issue in your community is what you set as your desired outcome, and that's really the bottom line. All of the citations and warnings and arrests and crime prevention activities that we undertake should all be targeted to getting to that outcome. There's a clear distinction in this model between an output and an outcome. Go to the next slide. Here's just a few examples, and actually all three of them that you're going to hear from today are on here, as well as some other agencies that have been successful using the D-DACTS model. And you'll see that you've got agencies as large as the Philadelphia Police Department with over 6,700 officers, down to Mount Laurel in New Jersey with 57. And I like to particularly note Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. They were one of the original agencies, and when they started this model, they really had a lot of work to do in terms of their data collection and their analysis, and they worked hard. They had tremendous results, and they're I think, a great example of really starting from a very basic level. Go ahead to the next slide. And finally for me, why do this? I think we're all being faced with increasing demands for services while our resources remain very, very limited. So D-DACTS gives us an opportunity to really maximize our efficiency. At the same time, our demands for service often conflict and compete with each other. Just thinking about crime control and traffic crashes and domestic violence and school security and all the other things that police departments have to face, anytime we can be more efficient, we're going to be ahead. We know now, based on a variety of experience, that crime and crashes often occur in close proximity. They don't always overlap, but there's relationships in those two incidents. We have a long history of knowing that crimes often involve a motor vehicle. You don't hear of a lot of walk-by shootings. We know that criminals use vehicles to get to and from the scenes of their crime. I think this next one is incredibly important. Vehicle stops yield valuable intelligence. If we're taking the opportunity to record who we're stopping and when we're stopping and what the vehicles are that they're driving, later on that can be very, very valuable in criminal investigations when crimes are discovered. And there's police departments all over the country that are using this information to solve crime. And lastly, also very important, D-DACTS really provides a flexible approach to addressing social harm in individual communities. One of the things I really like about the model, and I'm now implementing it in my second agency, it's flexible, it's adaptable to every community, and you take those guiding principles and you make them work for what your needs are in your jurisdiction. And Chip, I believe that's my ending point, so if there's any questions, I'm happy to follow up.
Very good, Chief. Thank you very much. So we'd like to take a pause every now and then during our webinars and just talk for a minute about what's been presented. Anybody on the line, let me ask the second question here. Why does the link between crashes and crime make sense to you? Who has a thought about that?
Chip, if you want, I could probably chime in here for a minute.
Go ahead. I
don't know that there's, criminological research behind this at this point, but if you think about, where crime occurs in places where there are maybe denser populations, lots of potential victims, easy for a suspect to blend in, oftentimes those correspond with places where there's a lot of traffic because people are coming to and from. So those two things kind of line up, and it really does make sense that they would overlap.
It does make sense. It's curious that this connection was not made a long time ago, or maybe it wasn't. It just didn't get into the mainstream. I am going to talk just briefly about the connection that we see between the Smart Policing Initiative and D-DACTS. I'm going to start with just a quick review. I'm on slide 11 now, Vivian. I'm going to start with a quick review of some of the basic principles of the Smart Policing Initiative as we understand them. And we have at this point about 35 agencies around the country who are implementing smart policing initiatives of various kinds and in various stages. So some are finishing up and some are just starting, but pretty certainly, if you're involved in smart policing, you're looking at troublesome people in troublesome places. Sometimes we call them hot people in hot places, but it's a strategic and risk-focused approach that uses data and analysis to identify who the people are that are causing the most trouble and what those places are that create the most trouble. I think that's fairly understandable. And doing that requires often that we make better use of the information resources that we have and the intelligence that we have or that we should be getting, and better use of technology. So most smart policing initiative sites are involved in enhanced or improved use of data intelligence and technology. We talk a lot about communication and collaboration in smart policing, and I'm very fond of using the term in-reach as well as the term outreach. So often when we're implementing new projects or new ideas, new initiatives, it's as important that we convince the people working next to us and working in our own agency as it is that we convince people outside of our agency that this is important work. In smart policing, everybody works with a research partner, research collaborator, and they employ fairly rigorous evaluation methodologies. So, for example, when we hear from Shawnee today, Shawnee, Kansas, in their case study, we believe that this is the first D-DACTS site to employ a quasi-experimental design to study the impact of D-DACTS, which means they did a before and after analysis, and they did a before and after analysis that compared their focused D-DACTS sites to other similar sites in Kansas. The findings from that evaluation are very promising, and that's what kind of catapults D-DACTS into what we can now say is an evidence-based strategy. And we're all interested in smart policing, not just in doing good work and discovering new things and being innovative, but when we find innovative things that work, there's a huge challenge in police agencies and in most other criminal justice agencies in sustaining the innovations that you find and that you implement. So it's not just getting the good work done, but once you know that it's good work and it's evaluated well, there's a huge challenge to sustaining that work over a long period of time. And so those are the things that smart policing tend to be involved in, no matter what the size of the jurisdiction or the type of problem that they're addressing. So smart policing and D-DACTS. As I suggested, the evidence supporting D-DACTS is growing. We have 2 smart policing initiative sites that are actively implementing and evaluating D-DACTS. As I said, you'll hear from Shawnee, Kansas today and York, Maine. I think York is on the line. Brett, are you on the line? Okay. Other sites involved with D-DACTS, yeah, as you can see, Cincinnati, Glendale, Kansas City, Lowell, Massachusetts, Memphis, Michigan State Police, and as we saw before, Philadelphia. So I'm now on slide 13, Vivian. So I think it should be kind of obvious or fairly obvious that agencies that are implementing D-DACTS are in fact embodying these smart policing principles and practices. There's a place focus, there's a heavy emphasis on crime analysis and analytics, a very strong emphasis on collaboration, a very strong interest on sustainability of organizational innovations, and in evaluating and determining results and outcomes. And so these are the reasons that we thought it would be a good idea to conduct this webinar on D-DACTS through the Smart Policing Initiative. We think there's great synergy here. We think there's great opportunities for advancing both of our missions through better collaboration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the case studies and invite Mike Alexander from Metro Nashville to present his case study.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Mike Alexander from Metro Nashville Police Department, and sorry about had a technical glitch there in the beginning. You can go ahead and roll the slide, please. I'm going to give you a little introduction, basically, of how we have found success, or what we consider to be success in our city using the D-DACTS philosophy. Again, I don't consider it a program. I consider it a management philosophy, if you will. At the end of the day, it's taking crash and crime data, marrying those two together to formulate hotspots based upon both. And as Chief Hall was saying, traditionally in law enforcement over the years, we have siloed those two issues. The crash folks kept up with the crash issues on the traffic side of the house, and then your crime folks kept up with crime issues on their side of the house. The two never talked. They never shared data. So again, D-DACTS makes perfect sense from a return on investment perspective to try to formulate hotspots in your communities based upon both of those issues, so that you can then deploy resources accordingly to try to improve the quality of life related to crash or crime. So I'll share with you some of the data we use and how we utilize this philosophy. Again, this is somewhat on autopilot in our city. In other words, there's not a start date or an end date. We pay attention to temporal analysis and density maps and our hotspots and deploying resources and tracking the efforts of those deployments. We do that on a daily basis, even by shift, by day, and really essentially by the hour. So you're somewhat limitless in how focused you can be as far as how you put these hotspot maps together to try to make the most positive difference you can in your community. I will point out the Titans player there, so usually I can't find another Titans fan anywhere in the country, so hopefully somebody on here is a Titans fan. So next slide. A little bit about our department. We are decentralized. We have 7 precincts. We'll be opening up the 8th precinct next month. Housed within each of those 7 precincts, obviously, is your patrol function, your drug units, your school resource officers, but also traffic motors and traffic cars are also assigned to the precincts, which gives those respective commanders a lot of resources to focus on these hotspots based upon crash and crime. Next. Just a quick look at our county. That's Davidson County here in Nashville, Tennessee. We're the only primary law enforcement agency in our county. We have 533 square miles, about 670,000 people or so. Very diverse population. And since 2004, we have paid very close attention to crash issues, as DUI arrest locations, fatal crashes, breaking down property damage crashes, personal injury crashes, and marrying that with the crime issues going on in the community. So, for example, you may have vehicle break-ins plaguing a certain neighborhood, but you may also have speeding complaints in that particular neighborhood. So focusing your efforts, high visibility enforcement in those areas at the right days and the right times based upon what the data is telling you, hopefully you will improve both. Instead of those two sides never even talking, so the traffic car doesn't know what the crime car is doing and nobody's communicating. So again, with our competing and conflicting demands that we face in today's era of law enforcement, this philosophy makes perfect sense from our perspective. Next. We have a CompStat process here, also accountability-driven leadership. Whether you're a proponent of CompStat or not, I would suggest you have to have some sort of accountability in place. And what I mean by that is it relates to D-DACTS. Once you have the data and once you formulate the hotspots and you know any given week what's plaguing your area in relation to crash or crime, then you have to deploy resources. But not only deploy resources, you have to use some supervisor accountability and make sure that time is being spent in those particular areas, and then track the results of the efforts in those areas. So again, everything will kind of start with the data and also again end with the data, but you have to have some sort of accountability measure in place, you know, to see if you're being successful. And of course you're not successful every time. Sometimes you have to redirect, but that helps you keep a good handle on that also. Next. Again, I mentioned some of these things earlier. We use zone intensity maps. We use statistical tables, hotspot maps. Again, the analyst, you'll hear from Brittany here soon, who does an excellent job out in Arizona, but we rely heavily on everything the analyst can provide to us because, again, you know, this is your old pen map of 30 years ago where we would take pins and plot them up on maps on the wall. We just happen to have the benefit of intelligent analysts, first of all, and also technology to put to this issue to make us a lot more effective. Next. This is one particular example. That is one precinct of our 7 precincts. I know you can't see, that's just street names and everything, but the point about this particular map, the red dots you see are crime intersections where where crimes have occurred. And then the yellow dot with like the black starburst in the middle of it are crash locations. So this is a very simple way to take and plot what's going on in your area related to crash or crime. And obviously you can see the 3 areas circled are the 3 most predominant areas, or I should say the 3 most predominant areas that have had crashes and crimes. And obviously we've had them in other places as well, but again, we can't be everywhere all the time. We don't have enough personnel to do that. So it only makes sense to focus on the most predominant areas that are being impacted by crash and crime. Not necessarily to the exclusion of all others, but again, those are the 3 biggest problem areas, so that's a quick visual of where we should focus. Next. Just some stats. Again, we started CompStat and accountability-driven leadership and really started what was D-DACTS before it was ever called D-DACTS back in 2004, started comparing fatals, DUI arrests, Part 1 crimes. Again, this won't be perfect every year, every time, but we believe it gives us the best chance of being successful in our agency. So obviously, with D-DACTS, you want to see fatals down, DUI arrest up, Part 1 crimes down. Next slide, please. And also vehicle stops up are a big part of this. Chief Hall mentioned partners and stakeholders. The only thing I would suggest on that is think outside the box on who could be a partner or a stakeholder, whether that's FedEx, UPS, the garbage company, taxi cab drivers, any entity in your city that are in the neighborhoods as much or more as you are. We should really reach out and partner with them and make sure they have a method of contacting you about problems. So that's a broad category there that is really limitless to your thinking as far as who can come on board and be a partner or a stakeholder with you. Neighborhood watch groups are big in our city. In 2004, we had about 250. Last year, we're up to 619. Usually attending several meetings a day. So that's a big part of our success here. Next. There's just some more historical data that shows, again, fatals, traffic fatalities, DUI arrests, and Part 1 crimes. Again, doesn't go perfect every time. You'll see fatal accidents, for example, 2010 to 11, 70 to 75. Again, it's not a fail-safe method, but as I often tell people, if you have a better idea, please share it with all of us because we're not trying to invent the wheel of law enforcement, but we're trying to do it smarter and more effectively with usually what is limited resources today. Next. Another slide about how we track fatals. Really the point of these slides are we're paying attention, meticulous, close attention to fatals, property damage crashes, personal injury crashes, DUIs, and that sort of thing to see exactly what's going on and where. Next. Here's a traffic stop, some statistics that I wanted to share with you. The high visibility enforcement is a big part of this. As Chief Hall mentioned, you don't hear of many walk-by shootings. The point of that is most of the criminal element is riding or driving a vehicle. Obviously not everybody in a car has committed any sort of criminal act, but nevertheless, it's fair to say that most persons that are engaged in criminal activity are either driving or riding in a vehicle. So when you start increasing your high visibility enforcement efforts and looking beyond the stop, it can make a big difference. And it's so important to track the results of those stops because when you stand in front of community meetings or city leadership, it's important to say, yes, we've stopped this many cars, but out of those stops, here's how many warrants we've served. Here's how much drugs we've got. Here's how many guns we've taken out of those cars. So again, don't sell yourself short by just deploying the resources without taking the time to really meticulously track the results of those deployments. You'll see in 2003, we had a little over 126,000 vehicle stops. In 2009, we're up to 283. And next slide, please. We're up in the 400s every year now. You'll see that up through 2013, 412,000 vehicle stops. That's a lot. Notice our warning percentage. That's 82%. So we leave that up to the officer. Again, there's multiple benefits to the stops, whether a citation's issued or not. This is great data to have when you get those complaints about vehicle stops and people saying it's all about the money, it's all about the money. Obviously in our city, if it's all about the money, we're missing a lot because we've got an 82% warning only percentage. But look at the next line below that. Almost 37,000 arrests made from the stops, vehicle stops made in 2013. So that's a great message to convey to even your officers, as we know that's a continual challenge to get the buy-in of why we should be so proactive. That's when it's nice to have this data to share internally as well as externally. Next. I know you can't see the names. The point of this particular slide are these locations. This is for the South Precinct. So the top blocks on the left and right, the top left, that's the top 10 locations in the South Precinct where a violent crime has occurred for the past 12 weeks. And then beside it, you have property crime list, top 10 locations. Now here's where we bring the D-DACTS philosophy into it. The two bottom charts, on the left side, personal injury, traffic crashes. On the right side, property damage, traffic crashes. That's an excellent start to start seeing in any given area where are the most predominant locations where we're having recurring crimes and crashes. So we can take and formulate areas for deployment based upon this data, and it's a great way to start. Next. This is the density map broken down by shifts, day shift, evening shift, and midnight shift across the top. The point of this particular map is, you can't really get specific enough. In other words, what's a problem on the evening shift may not be the same area that's a problem on the day shift. So it's just, again, how focused can we be? How meticulous can we break down the data to pinpoint specific days and times? And I often tell people, just because last Thursday we got hit with personal robberies and maybe 2 DUI arrests in the same location, does that mean that this coming Thursday the same thing's going to happen? No, it does not. But again, I'm not sure that there's a better way. It's all we've got to go on. So we try to keep impacting those areas until we see a difference. Next. This is an example I would like to show because that's a Microsoft Streets map for about $50. You can install Microsoft Streets on your system because a lot of times, obviously, we understand that all departments are not equal in terms of resources, in terms of finances, technology, analysts, and things of that nature. This is a map that reads pretty well that you can immediately start putting crash and crime issues on there. Next. This is just another density map. I like to point out the bottom part of this. This is for personal robberies, and you can do it with any category, DUI arrest locations, fatals, whatever the case may be, speeding complaints. In other words, fill in the blank. You're really limitless in what you can put on here. This particular one relates to personal robberies. You can see the darker areas. Brittany's smart enough to tell you how she's able to do this. I'm just smart enough to know that the darker areas are worse, as Chief Hall likes to say. So you can take a quick look at that and see the most prevalent day and time to be the victim of a personal robbery in the South Precinct based on the last 12 weeks is Monday and Wednesday at 9 o'clock at night. So again, it just gives you a timeline of what to try to focus on this current week based on how bad you got impacted the prior week. Next. This is an accident and DUI arrest location. Again, we've traditionally always just paid attention to crime locations. This is a good example where you can start plotting personal injury crashes, property damage crashes, DUI arrest locations on a map. Next. This is a 4-week commercial and street robbery map. So the previous slide was crash related. Here's a crime related map of commercial robberies and street robberies. Next. Interesting thing about this slide, it was the previous one you just saw, but every green dot on this slide here represents a vehicle stop made by one of our officers. So from an accountability perspective, that's what you want to see. You want to see the vehicle stop dots completely covering up the crash and crime map. In other words, there's a benefit anytime we make a stop anywhere. However, in terms of deploying resources and trying to make a difference on where people are becoming victims of crime and crash related issues, we're obligated to be in the problem areas. We're obligated to be in the problem spots. I think that's also a good sell internally and externally of why we need to be in certain locations. It's based upon the data. It takes the subjectiveness out of it. It's a very objective way of doing your business. Next. All right, and that's it. I know that's a fast forward version. I'm going to sit back and take a breath for a minute. But obviously, I would love to work with anybody from this point forward as far as exchanging information or learning from you all as well. So thank you.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, my name is Brittany Barup, and I am a crime analyst with the Mesa Police Department. Thank you, Captain Alexander, for all the nice things that you said before. Just make it a little bit, pressure on me, but I can deal with this. Let's go. I've been assigned to the traffic and specialty crimes for about 6 years now, and when I was first given this assignment, like the majority of all the other agencies across the nation, I had never overlaid crime and collision data. I was sitting at my desk one day, and in walked my lieutenant with the guiding principles of D-DACTS and said, do a little light reading, Brittany, because D-DACTS is coming to Mesa. Let's talk a little bit about Mesa, Arizona, if you would. Mesa is the third largest city in Arizona, and it's also the home for the Chicago Cubs spring training. It encompasses 132 square miles and is home to about 462,000 people. We have 780 foreign officers, 489 civilian staff, and a crime analysis unit of 7 analysts and 4 technicians. Now, when we first started D-DACTS in 2010, our first attempt was before we'd ever gone to an implementation workshop, and I think we made the same mistake that I think most agencies make when they first implement D-DACTS. We moved our D-DACTS areas every 28 days in a CompStat-like philosophy, which made gathering statistical significant data impractical for analysts, and it also didn't give enough time for the community to gain the perception of highly visible patrol in those areas. So after we went to a workshop in 2011, we developed successful D-DACTS areas, but we were still just utilizing 18 traffic officers for the whole city. We have the same problem that everybody else has talked about. Patrol officers do not want to hear anything about accident information, and traffic officers don't want to hear anything about crime. So we had to do a little bit of creative thinking, and we researched just how many calls patrol alone was answering when it was related to collisions and how much time was spent on those. So when we did that analysis, we found that if we lowered traffic accidents by 10%, patrol could gain 2 hours of proactive time back a day. That got everyone perked up, and I finally got my first district to bite off on doing a D-DACTS pilot program. So for those of you that can't relate to the size of Mesa, let's bring it down to just one district. Shown here in red is our central district. It encompasses 14 square miles and has 80,000 residents. Let's start with the beginning of how we started in Central District D-DACTS. We looked at 3 years of historical hotspots, calls for service, collisions, and crime. We looked at it on day shift, we looked at it on swing shift, we looked at it on graves. But what we noticed is there was one area that kept coming up that was overlapping for all districts, or all shifts. So what is shown on the map is a 3-year average of crime and accidents that 1 square mile, or 7% of the total district, was producing. We implemented this area in July of 2013, and in the 6 months prior to this area, prior to our implementation, we were still seeing 22% of crime and 31% of accidents in that 7% of the district. Now I'm going to do a word of caution here. When we first did this, map is showing you our D-DACTS 2.0. When we first did D-DACTS 1.0, we didn't include the right stakeholders in selecting the area. It was just me and our traffic lieutenant. So in 2.0, we brought in a sergeant and an officer spokesperson, and we've seen increased enforcement in that area. So the question I get most often is, where do I start and how do I begin? The one thing you should know going into this process is it will not happen overnight. Do not get discouraged, and let your chain of command know that you need time to compile your data and set up your processes and get feedback. Now let's look at what the Central District is provided on a monthly basis. Next slide. On a 28-day cycle, each D-DACTS zone gets a breakdown of the time spent in the area, the percentage of the crime and crashes happening in the area compared to the total district, and the time of day of the activity. They also get a top contact list of people contacted in that area and the top addresses that are making patrol respond to them in the area. On a monthly basis, they get a breakdown of collisions, crime, and enforcement activity in the area. And these numbers are shown compared to the 3-year averages per month. In Mesa, we chose to do a 3-year average because we had so much growth if we look back 5 years that we thought it wouldn't be relevant. We also decided to do a monthly average instead of a yearly average because we have an influx of winter visitors and spring training traffic. So what was the outcome of our 6-month program? Next slide. We compared the 3-year averages for the month in the D-DACTS area, outside the D-DACTS area or our control area, and then our district as a whole. As you can see, collisions and crime reductions were lower in the enforcement area than they were in the areas we weren't enforcing and the district as a whole. It should be noted that the reduction in crime that occurred in the D-DACTS area was statistically significant and fell outside of the normal ranges. The decrease in the area for our D-DACTS area can also be attributed to, we combine that to low tolerance prosecution area, where any crime that was committed in that area, we got together with the prosecution and walked that through so they got harsher punishment. So the outcome that we came up with our 6-month assessment is that we are still going to stay in this area, because although they had reductions, they still were producing a disproportionate amount of activity, 20% of crimes and 21% of collisions in that area. So what does your agency need in the way of technology to start implementing D-DACTS? Here's the part where I get to tell you how much implementing D-DACTS in your agency will cost you. The best part is 0. If you have computers and you have Microsoft Office on those computers, then you have almost everything you need to do the crime and crash analysis. To create many of the charts and graphs that I've shown and that you will see in the next slides, you will need a few tools. You'll need a database application such as Access to help you organize, query, and make connections among your data. You'll need a spreadsheet application such as Excel, a presentation tool such as PowerPoint, and finally you'll need a GIS or mapping application such as ArcGIS or MapInfo. If you don't have access to those applications, then Google Earth or Bing or other free services will allow you to get started mapping your data. Another added bonus of implementing D-DACTS in your agency is the cadre of trained analysts that can work with your agency remotely or in person to help you at any stage of implementation. If you'd like assistance on this, you'll need to just contact our D-DACTS project manager, Peggy Schaefer. So what does the future hold for Mesa D-DACTS? D-DACTS in Mesa, next slide. D-DACTS in Mesa is always evolving and improving. What we're going to look at now is looking at the causation breakdown of the type of accidents that are occurring in those areas and if patrol can actually have an impact on them. And we're also looking to do another media reveal because we've been lacking quite some time with getting our media on board in a positive spin. We're also looking to add probation and parolee information to the D-DACTS areas. And we are always looking for new suggestions and ideas, so if anybody out there has any suggestions and ideas, please feel free to contact me. I think we'll pass it over now to Chief Larimore.
Thank you, Brittany. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, my name is Larry Larimore, and I've been with the Shawnee Police Department for the past 28 years, and I've had the honor of serving as the Chief of Police for the past 3. Before I talk about our department's D-DACTS approach, I want to tell you a little bit about the area of the country that we're in and our city. Next slide, please. The city of Shawnee is one of 119 cities in a 9-county, 2-state region known as the Greater Kansas City Metropolitan Area. The population of the KC Metro is estimated just over 2 million people. We border Kansas City, Kansas to the north and are about a 15-minute drive time to downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Next slide. Our population is just over 64,000 with a service area of over 43 square miles. Our department averages 71 calls for service and 47 officer-initiated activities per day, about 100 violent crimes and 1,250 property crimes per year, and an average of about 1,000 total crashes, with 122 of them being either fatal or injury-related. Next slide. Shawnee Police Department's got a staff of 110 employees divided into the Administration, Patrol, and Support Services Division. And in 2011, our department was selected as a Smart Policing Initiative's Phase 3 study site. Our SPI project's objective was to study the application of the D-DACTS approach in a target area in the effort to reduce the incidence of certain stranger crimes. I think we need to go forward one more. Oh. And those stranger crimes for us include robbery, burglaries to auto, commercial and residential locations, and vehicle thefts, and also to reduce motor vehicle crashes, both injury and non-injury, and also to identify the possible extent of crime displacement and or diffusion of benefits both inside our city and in neighboring cities. These are on the slide now are what we have defined as our policing priorities over the past 3 years. We structured our staff to work smarter and implemented evidence-based crime prevention, traffic safety, and community policing strategies. D-DACTS fits well within our policing priorities, and it is a strategic crime and crash control strategy. Just like Chief Hall said earlier, I too believe that D-DACTS works well within any existing crime or social harm control philosophies or programs. Next step. When I'm talking about the D-DACTS approach in our city, I find it best to talk about how we implemented it and the guiding principles to kind of set the stage. Our department's crime analysis program started in 2002 when we hired a very well-educated, trained, and experienced crime analyst. She was running at 100 miles an hour, and we were still down there about 15. Like a lot of law enforcement agencies, we struggled for several years integrating crime analysis information into anything other than traditional responses to crimes that had already occurred. So we began looking for a way to be more proactive in our policing approach. We became aware of the D-DACTS initiative developed by NHTSA and piloted in several agencies in 2009, and it came back on our radar in March 2010. Our commanders attended a traffic safety conference, D-DACTS presentation, and afterwards the chief and I decided that we'd like to give it a try. We went from stop to go in 3 months with only 1 month time frame from the implementation workshop to deploying an operational plan. I did not highlight these timelines to brag, but really to make a point that it ended up being a problem for us that we had to overcome. Next slide. During that 1 month time period prior to full implementation, we contacted all the stakeholders listed here. Our local NCAA chapter, or NAACP chapter, was a good contact for us because we were going to increase motorist contacts in that focus area, and we wanted to dispel any biased policing thoughts. Once we explained the approach, they understood, and they've been supportive since day one. The second half is the partners, and those are the folks that are going to get the job done. And like I talked earlier, we were really quick to implement this, and what we found is that we didn't spend enough time with our staff to get all the buy-in that we could and also manage the cultural change that we were experiencing. Next slide. Data collection for us was really easy. Our analyst, like I said, 100 miles an hour, she already had all our crime data in a crime analysis specific application, and all our crash data was collected by the city's traffic engineer. We were able to give him all those location points to the GIS manager, and he started producing maps for us. And this is our map for 3 years of data prior to our implementation of the D-DACTS approach. The bottom box, the red box you can see, is the 75th Street corridor. And you can tell we have 2 areas in our city where crime density and crash density overlap. We chose the 75th Street corridor because it's a disproportionate area, and I'll talk a little more about that. The 75th Street corridor is a 2-mile-long roadway segment that includes 5 lanes and has 3 major traffic signal controlled intersections with a daily traffic count of about 25,000 vehicles. What you see driving down 75th Street is a very busy corner gas station and convenience store, several apartment complex entrances and exits, fast food, sit-down restaurants, bars, small and medium-sized retail stores, an elementary school, and some family dwellings. This is an area in our city that has been, is, and will always be a target-rich environment for stranger crime perpetrators and a high crash area because of the traffic count and major intersections. Next slide. Like I said, the 75th Street corridor was the area we chose because it had an overall disproportionate volume of stranger crime and crashes. That area encompasses 0.8 square miles of our city, which is only 2% of the land area, and the population base was 8% of our total population. Upon analysis, this area accounted for 38% of our SPI targeted crimes and almost 15% of our total crashes. Another reason why we chose this area is because it was hot across all of our operational shifts. Next slide. Just real quick, strategic operations. Since day one, we've always had very detailed operational plans. Our plans include the collected data, maps, the analysis information, defined deployment target times based on temporal analysis, unit goals and objectives, enforcement strategies, and an evaluation and assessment measures. Next slide. We did a really good job of information sharing and outreach. You could see all these examples here. We did executive summaries quarterly, year 1, year 2, year 3, several department newsletter articles, governing body updates, media releases, and our final sharing is our final report that we did for the SPI study that should be out soon. Next slide. Mike Alexander talked about accountability and being able to track activity. We have a very robust accountability tracking application here at the police department, and we look at our D-DACTS activity weekly and our crime and crash pre and post numbers at a 90-day time period. As chief, the things I immediately want to know is if we met our goals by the number of hours in the D-DACTS zone during the target times, and I want to make sure that our contacts are at least 2 per hour or above. These numbers are very important to me because D-DACTS in Shawnee is based on time spent in a problem area making high visibility contacts. Like Brittany said, with her versions, we're currently on version 4 of our D-DACTS approach, and this past summer we expanded our approach into the control area of our SPI study. With each adjustment, each version is making our approach better and more focused. Next slide. Outputs is not really one of the formal guiding principles, but we found this to be very important when we're celebrating with our staff because it's very important to them. Real quick, you can see there, we spent almost 5 hours per day in there, and their contacts were 2.26 per hour. And I don't know, I'm not sure if Mike said this or Brittany said this, this is really important for the administrators out there because all of these outputs were accomplished with existing road patrol and traffic safety officers during the unassigned time with no additional cost to our budget or additional staffing. So based on that return on investment, we believe this is a sustainable crime and crash prevention strategy. One more slide. Our outputs, this is the results of our 3-year study. You can see there, these were very impressive. Our robberies were down over 70%, vehicle thefts over 40, commercial burglaries almost 35, and so on. What was really cool about this is that not one of those was statistically significant, but all of those together was. And the total reduction in those target crimes was almost 40%. Our total crashes were down over 24%, and that was very close to being statistically significant. The other outcomes that we did see is that we did not see any other displacement of crime in adjoining districts or cities. We do believe that there was a diffusion of benefits to the adjoining areas in our city, as well as to the southwest area of the corridor in Lenexa, Kansas. And another great outcome is this was really positive change for our policing culture in Shawnee. So lastly, just the next slide, Vivian, and the thing that we learned through all this for the past 3 years of doing this is you have to involve your staff top to bottom from the very start. This is a change in culture. This is contemporary. This is prevention instead of arrest and number of tickets. We have to have a clear and specific operational plan, set a goal, and get your staff to be involved in developing that plan. And like Mike Alexander said, it's only practice if you're not keeping score. That's it for me, Chip.
Very good, Chief. Thank you very much. We've gone on for quite a bit here. I think it's been very interesting. I do have actually a couple questions that I've developed and a couple concluding remarks, but I think there's somebody out there that does have a question. Doug from Peoria, are you still with us?
Were you looking for Doug from Rockford?
Rockford, I'm sorry, Rockford, yeah.
The question I had early on, actually, under the Nashville presentation was when the map was put up there regarding the the crime data mapped with the traffic data. I was wondering what types of crimes they're looking at to put onto that map. And then also, are they using UCR or NIBRS to track?
Yes, the maps are, again, it's so flexible in terms of putting it together for the issues that are in your particular jurisdiction. So as it relates to each component, it could be a myriad of one or two categories, whether it's break into vehicles and DUI arrest locations, or whether it's personal robberies and fatal crashes, whatever the case may be. Again, I've often tell people when it comes to formulating hotspots, you can't box yourself in. You can't limit yourself to a very, very small area, or you can't have it too wide open either. So again, the flexibility of this philosophy, that's one thing I did not mention during my presentation. However, that's what we talk to folks about all over the country, is how very flexible that this philosophy is. There's really no cookie-cutter approach that can be put together to meet the particular needs of your city. And of course, we have our own analysts at each of the 7 precincts, and also a centralized analyst section at headquarters that are compiling all the data, recording everything that's coming in pretty much on a continual basis, and then pushing that back out. And then, of course, we are somewhat integrated with UCR as well. So it's a myriad of things. And then the traffic section, for example, is also very creative in plotting DUI arrest locations and tracking that back to maybe last location served, or offender address, or anything like that. So again, you're pretty unlimited in what you can choose to track and start plotting. You know, sooner or later, you're going to find clusters of hotspots related to both crash and crime. Now, I've often had chiefs tell me before that they just don't believe crashes are occurring anywhere near where crimes are occurring. And if the data tells you that, then I would agree. But most of the time, again, there's so many issues that we all are combative with trying to make a difference with. You know, there's enough things going on that if you plot enough issues on the crash or crime side of the house, you're going to find predominant areas to the exclusion of some others.
Thank you. Thank you. Did I get that answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'd actually like to ask our 3 presenters just for a minute there. I've heard a few things that have been discussed in terms of obstacles or challenges to getting D-DACTS up and running. One of them has a lot to do with data and integrating crime analysis into all this. I think another one has to do with figuring out the right kind of dosage. And there seems to be several experiences around trying to move too quickly, too fast, and you know, not getting a lot of people involved up front that may have, you know, caused some delays in getting things going. And then we heard from I think it was Mesa, several different versions of D-DACTS that were up and running. So D-DACTS may be actually a very dynamic initiative that, and sometimes it's hard to keep control over, is moving very quickly. So I'd just like to ask, what have you seen as the biggest challenge to sustaining D-DACTS once it gets up and running?
I'll chime in here. This is Brittany from Mesa.
Thanks, Brittany.
The biggest challenge that I see to sustaining it, and it's been mentioned in every single presentation, is that accountability. When we first started here in Mesa, we had great data, but nobody was looking at it, and nobody was holding anybody accountable for having enforcement in that area. And once we started producing maps and showing people that, yes, it is not having an effect, but the reason it's not having an effect is because you're not in the area, then that accountability really gets it to stay in there. And once they see that they're in there and they're not doing anything other than just their normal job, but in the right area, you get more buy-in.
Thank you. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I would think 2 things come to mind on things that we would suggest to kind of be able to look out for or watch out for, try to make sure you do these 2 things as you implement. One is, I think sometimes in leadership, in any sort of leadership role or supervisor role, you tend to, in other words, we have a very good understanding of exactly what we think D-DACTS is and what it means to our agency, how it should work, how we should do this, how it will work. But sometimes we don't spend enough time educating the officers, you know, the boots on the ground, the ones actually out and about, actually getting it done and telling people about it. So, you know, I would just say sometimes you can look back and say you can feel real confident about how well leadership understands what D-DACTS is and why you're doing it, but it's real important to make sure you spend time in whatever creative ways you can do with the line personnel to make sure you know that they have a clear understanding, because obviously, you know, again, they're the ones doing the work, so they need to understand the philosophy. And then the second thing that comes to mind in terms of not having an analyst or not having technology and that sort of thing, you know, just start where you are. Anything is a good start. I think I've always said if you could spend 30 minutes with a supervisor, you can start D-DACTS. It's just a very basic understanding of, hey, what's going on this week, and then once you figure that out, what's going on, okay, where is that going on at? And then after that, you know, start saturating the area with high visibility enforcement. So I think that's a good reminder, especially to smaller departments, is to just start where you are. Just take the last 24 hours, and even if you don't have an analyst, if it's important enough to you, select an officer, have them come in off the street, have them spend the first hour of their day just kind of plotting a map for you related to whatever issues you're being plagued with. So again, I think sometimes we try to make it too hard, I guess is what I'm trying to say. When in all reality, it can be a pretty simple start once you understand what the philosophy is. So educating the line personnel and not being afraid just to go ahead and start doing the best you can with what you've got, I think are two important things to keep in mind on the front end.
Thanks, Mike. And how about you, Larry? Biggest challenge?
I agree completely with what Mike and Brittany had to say, and I would think for us, it's just having the officers understand that this is our philosophy. This is something that's not a project or a program. It's not going to go away. This is how we police anymore. For us, it's a strategic approach, and it's just like anything else they would do, traffic enforcement locations, property checks, you know, all those have-tos that you have to do during the day. D-DACTS is a have-to for us. So it's very clear and specific about how we do it and when we do it and those kind of things. But I agree completely with Mike is that we need to reach out more often with our staff and talk about the philosophy. And, you know, we do share a lot of information, but it's just getting that understanding that this is how we police.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much, all three of you, actually. I appreciate the presentations. Vivian, I'm on about slide 58 right now. Do we have that up?
Yes, we do.
Good. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just wrap up with a few concluding thoughts about all this. And again, invite anybody who has any questions or any comments to make them or send them to SPI@cna.org, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. And again, I encourage you to complete the evaluation when it's sent to you, especially if you'd like to see something more in the way of D-DACTS webinars and maybe get more into the details of analysis and the things that go on. I think we'd be happy to do that if there's an interest in it. So clearly we think that D-DACTS can do a lot for an agency in terms of improvement and advancing things. Analyzing and determining the spatial relationships between crashes and crime. It seems to be something that holds up regardless of the size of the agency or the population. So it's something that should really be paid attention to. Renews emphasis on traffic safety. I think we can also say that it probably renews emphasis on preventive approaches. It can be very flexible. You don't have to pick any certain crime or any certain type of traffic problem. You let the data kind of speak for itself. And D-DACTS can be very flexible that way. It does meet CALIA standards. As we've heard several times, it does help increase accountability and productivity in the agency. And if you do it full bore and take this to heart, it builds relationships and strengthens them with, as I would say, partners and stakeholders, both internal to the organization and external. Next slide, please. So these are kind of more of my thoughts as I've gone through this for the past couple of weeks. We've done some rehearsals, and I've looked at all this material. I think there are several very important things that are going on with D-DACTS as front policing that should just be emphasized as we close up here. We really like the movement from analysis to solutions. It's very clear in D-DACTS. It's very clear in smart policing. So investing in analytic capacity is a good thing. I very much appreciated the comment that someone just made about, if you don't have an analyst on staff, get an officer involved in this and get some analysis done. It's critically important. And those are very difficult decisions for executives to make, to take officers off the street even for a short while and get them involved in analysis. But in smart policing and D-DACTS, analysis drives a lot, and it takes you to places, successful places that you haven't been before. A lot of work needs to be done, whether it's D-DACTS or some other innovation that you're doing to convince the doubters. So the importance of constant communication, different types of communication, in-reach and outreach, persistence, having a strategy for convincing these people is very important for D-DACTS. Can't say enough about working with stakeholders. I think that point was made several times. And as we have said several times today, D-DACTS holds great promise for increasing public safety and reducing crime, not just the traffic piece, but the crime piece. And we would just encourage anybody that gets involved in D-DACTS or that is currently involved in D-DACTS to look at as rigorous an evaluation as you can conduct with the resources that you have. And if you would ever like any help in that regard, we have a whole cadre of subject matter experts, as does the D-DACTS group, that can help you with that. So please reach out to either of us as well, and we'd be glad to help with any of that. Again, let me thank our presenters. Let me thank Peggy. Let me thank DJA and Kate McNamee. And Vivian, thank you very much for keeping us together today. And floor is open for a final thought or comment or question from anybody.
Chip, this is Chief Larimore. I just would like to repeat this. This is easily implemented. This is easily sustained, and it's just smart policing. I mean, that's just the point of it, is put your resources where they need to be and will have their greatest impact. And that's what D-DACTS is all about.
Yeah, Chief, I very much appreciated the number of times it was said that this was done without additional resources. This is, smart management of what you have, producing better results. I think that's a key thing, too.
Okay. Your PD.
Yeah, please.
I couldn't agree with you more on your final closing points there where you came back. As you know, we struggled initially when we got going with D-DACTS, and now it's been a great philosophy. I have to agree with the chief earlier. It's from the top down. I think for smaller agencies, especially something like ours where we're rural, in looking at the areas, anecdotally we knew where our problems were, but again, as one of the other presenters made a point, there's not many walk-by shootings. There also isn't a lot of mass transportation in rural communities, and we have definitely been able to correlate our crashes, our traffic infractions with our crimes within those areas. Everything from, recovering a number of stolen guns, burglaries, and dope has really increased greatly when we're working our hot spots and then hot spots within them. But I really have to attribute a lot of that to us being able to tap into the SPI, getting Julie Wittrell and Dr. Chia on board when we realized what we were doing and trying to find our way through it. I believe this is a program that we really need to see, especially for smaller agencies, to initially get connected with a good research analysis and also with a good crime analysis and get that guideline. From there, we could tap into our data, things that we were storing, garbage in, garbage out, but there was a lot of positive data in there. We just weren't able to extract in a format that we could present to patrol. Anecdotally, I could, bring a lot of things forward, but when they saw a lot of the hard numbers, we had people actually jumping back up. And I go back to your presenter, that freed up some of their time. They didn't want to go back to the same areas. They didn't want to deal with the same type of issues. So with that, again, I do believe you really need to take a look at your analyst, get one on board, and your researcher, at least to get you up and running off the ground, and then a full push from the top to the bottom will make a successful program.
Thank you. Would you please say where you're from again, because I don't think everybody heard.
Lieutenant Charlie Chinowski from York, Maine, PD.
Yeah. Thanks, Lieutenant.
You got it.
And Chip, this is Peggy Schaefer. I would just like to tell the listening audience that we do have some workshop availability in NHTSA Regions 5, 7, or 10. So if anyone wants to host or attend a workshop there, feel free to contact me, and I will try to accommodate that need. And thank you so much for hosting today.
Sure. Thank you, Peggy. Anybody else? Okay, so please remember to complete those evaluations, and thanks everybody for staying with us today and for joining in on this webinar. I appreciate it very much. Take care.